Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatiron Syndicate Podcast. We're in the shop. We've got two special guests with us. Jeremy Agostino, who you know from Muddy Shift Rally, but we've also got Dominic Acia from GetaDomTune. He happened to be in the area. Had to have you come by the shop, and well, I twisted your arm to come by the shop.
Yeah, I think I asked you if I could.
Yeah, and have a little conversation, especially since you were on the podcast not that many weeks ago, and we got a lot of questions, and people wanted to hear us talk more about some other things. So
I do want to say something.
Yeah.
Those first two episodes.
Yeah.
The reception was very warm, honestly, and it was warmer than I thought it was going to be, and it was heartwarming. I like it. I appreciate it.
It was.
So thank you guys.
You've been
nice
at this a long time, and it's clear that you've had a big impact on the community, and our viewers or whatever really they're aware of what you do and they appreciate it, and it was very cool to see.
Yeah, it was really nice. The car scene where I'm at, especially in various regions, is very fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of tuner wars going on, and just a lot of negativity, in the whole thing. And so it's hard, and you find out that someone's been telling you something for years, and they've been BSing you, and they talking bad about an experience they had or a person or whatever, and it turns out some personal vendetta, and then I get caught up in it somehow, and that kind of stuff happens. And so it's it can be discouraging, as somebody who's looked at by a lot of people, and some of those things can be said about you and whatever, and just it's one reason why I have started kind of initiated this movement to try and bring the car community back together again in my region. I haven't even talked about it outside of that. Just I have some plans, events that I'm going to do, and I'm going to go around the shops and talk to people. I just want to try and glue it back together again as good as I can. Because I don't like the toxicity. I don't like the fighting and that kind of stuff. I know online I can back it harsh sometimes because I'm just so blunt and straight.
Sure.
And it's not often like the intent of, to put somebody down. I just like, no, it doesn't work that way. This is what it is. And people get kind of like, whoa.
It's a challenge. And sometimes, when you've answered the same question multiple times, it's hard to write the full novel every single time.
Yeah.
Honestly, to a certain extent, that was my motivation to start making videos in the first place, answering questions, because I just got to the point where I've answered this 50 times on the phone so many times. If I could just answer this once, do it really well, so that then I could just say, go check this out. Here's the answer for you. Then everybody gets kind of like that best, most detailed answer every single time, versus sometimes, that call, the 300th time you're getting question about a hybrid swap and what is it and what do you actually need.
Please don't.
It's hard to go through all of the details every single time.
So, absolutely. And that was one of the motivators for a lot of my videos too, is to do the same thing.
I was going to say what's bananas is how many of the old questions and wrong answers are still floating around on the internet.
Yeah.
How many times do you have to tell somebody that why, how that cylinder 4 gets fuel first, not last is one.
Well, and this is in part because of the fracturing, right?
Yeah.
Because you're now on multiple kind of owners groups that are now getting back into these same cars that have been around for 20 years.
We used to have a big websites. NASIOC is quintessential place where there were stickies and things like that. And now, you're right. Every little we've got our Colorado Subaru Facebook group, and then I'm sure you've got your Seattle Facebook group, and you live by the other side of the state, right?
Yeah, Spokane
Facebook group for Subarus and stuff like that. Yeah, so
that's one of the challenges. Ever since the forums kind of lost the focus. Forums was a nice organized way where you could search. Sometimes to the fault of the community, but it was a good way to organize information, questions, and answers. Yeah. And now once it switched to message boards and stuff like that. Can you search? Yes, but it's not organized in nearly the same way. And so the ability for somebody that's coming in new, coming in fresh to find information, it's I would say in some ways more challenging now, because a lot of times if they don't know what NASIOC is and they land on NASIOC, because how many times you put in a Subaru search in Google and Nasiak is like the first thing that comes up.
Which is great for that.
Yeah, but what is that? Like, and
right, they don't know. Sure, exactly. Yeah.
And then unfortunately too, like a lot of the photos that were in Nasiak, all of those are gone, especially on the older posts.
Yeah, all the
like
photo bucket stuff is been changed.
So it's harder to figure it out. It's harder to know where to go. So yeah, it's we that have been in it for a while. It's kind of like we have to have a rethink of, all right, well, how can we make this information available?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So in our local groups, right, you're gonna be part of a Facebook, and it's not even message board as much as it's a feed.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost a stock ticker that goes vertical.
Yeah.
And so you just like, if you want to go back, it's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And Facebook you'll go back a little bit and just loading, skipping, and it really has been a detriment in a lot of ways to the proper dissemination of information.
Yeah.
And truth. One guy can say some.
That's how the wrong answers, like, they come up again.
Yeah.
Like every 3 or 4 years, like, oh, you got to do this now. Like, wait a minute, we've been through this. Like, this is the third time. No, don't do that.
Yeah, third time today.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's one thing that when people do ask stuff like that, I always try and treat them as if the first guy to ask for that day.
Sure.
The only time that I ever get snarky is if when I give them the answer, they then argue with it.
Yeah.
And then I'm just like, if you're asking me, then why are you arguing with the answer? Just because it wasn't the answer you wanted, that kind of thing. That's when I get a little snarky.
Yeah.
Honestly,
That's a challenge, and that I think is always going to be a challenge. I don't think that ever goes away.
No, and I had this 12 years of my life where snarky was standard operating procedure because I was in the military, right? And so, along with why is this? Well, because this is what it is. Well, I want something else. It's too effing bad,
right?
Because I'm telling you, this is what you're going to do now. Because
Yes.
this is how the rank structure works,
Yes.
So, and sometimes I do have a bit of the hangover, of military stuff. So I can be a little like, I am the authority in this. Yeah. This is what it is, And
so if you reach out to any one of us and we're a little short, apologies here right off the bat, and just know that we're just getting older. And
my heart's in the right place.
Yeah, the heart's in the
right
right place.
Beating a little slower.
That's right.
A little more cholesterol built up.
Something happened. You just caught us on the wrong day, but we'll still do our best to get you the information. It's just we're just old. That's what it is.
Yeah. I care greatly about the scene, and I have always. And that's another thing that makes me somewhat hostile sometimes. It's because I feel obligated to protect it. And then when people are like scamming others or I catch that stuff, it's like you're scamming my people, and the super people are my people. Even if they don't know me, if you don't know me, you're my people.
One of the challenges
I'm always
too with this change and where you don't have forums as much, because when Nasiak or any forum, somebody creates a login, a username, whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, that is who they are all the time.
Right.
And you have this history. You can go back and search. I mean, there's so many people that were on Nasiak that had, thousands and thousands of posts, and you know who they were because they're always answering stuff, and you kind of even if you never talk to them, you know who they are.
Yeah, and they member number. You can go, oh, that guy's been here forever.
Oh, I was gonna say one of the crazy things about forums that you don't have in Facebook unless you really dig into it, or other Discords or whatever that you're getting your information now, is you could look at somebody and be like, okay, you see one guy replies to your question and he has like 5 posts.
Yeah.
And he's just joined the forums a week ago. It's like, okay. And then you see another guy who has 10,000 posts and has been a member for 5 years, and they're like, oh wow, this guy probably knows what he's talking about.
I should at least listen to this guy.
Yeah,
there's a level of credibility that's easy to verify immediately.
Well,
and who the hell is this guy?
You build up that kind of familiarity with the users on the forums, but like in message boards, there can be some of that, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not to the same degree, and the message boards themselves are so fractured that, like, you just who is the knowledgeable person in this board, and it's harder to figure that out.
Something funny happened to me. I kind of did this. I kind of asked for this. I posted in one of the Subaru groups just a joke picture of me towing a WRX just by the front wheels, with the dolly. Now, I knew that there was no drive shaft in the car, naturally, right?
Okay.
So I was like, yeah, let me just post this up because I know it's going to happen. And I got like hundreds of people being like, you idiot, you're towing a Subaru wrong. Right. You probably exploded the whole thing. You're going to have to throw the whole car away now. Yeah. And then one person actually commented, if you look at this guy's post history, he probably knows that you shouldn't tow a Subaru like this.
Yeah.
He's probably just trolling all you guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So in the chat, I want to see Jeremy as a troll at least 100 times.
Hashtag Jeremy's a troll.
Yes. Hashtag Jeremy's. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Well, so
I am a troll.
let's move into some of these questions. Like, Dom, was there anything top of your mind that you saw that people asked in the comments that you wanted to? Now that we're here, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So they said they wanted episodes 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
So
We'll call this.
So this is
3A.
3. All right. So we definitely got to use more of those apparently.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't remember a whole lot of questions. There were just a whole lot of nice comments, which is I was not expecting, because I make my own videos and I get people to come in and try and create havoc in them. So it was very nice to see the nice comments. I don't.
Well, so one of the comments that I saw a bunch was people that were asking about the FA20 platform, the FA24 platform compared to the EJs. I mean, is that something that you want to try and dive into?
Yeah, I can talk more to the FA20 than the 24.
Maybe just some like top level stuff. Maybe it doesn't have to get that specific, but because they're entirely different. I mean,
they're way different.
That's one of the top line things that the guys that have the newer engines have to understand, is that there really is like almost no common bolts.
There's no overlap
between the two. Yeah,
there's almost no
entirely
overlap.
different architecture.
So let me just go to the first thing I tell people. The FA20 in the WRX and the BRZ are both very different.
Yeah.
So that's important to know. The FA20 and the WRX, personally, I can't stand from a performance standpoint. Now, and by that I mean like an aftermarket, crank it up performance standpoint.
Yeah.
As far as FA20 being a good engine, it is a good engine.
Yeah.
And let me back up a smidge. One thing that viewers and owners and tuners and shop owners need to realize is that when something is created by the manufacturer, they had very specific design constraints and goals in mind.
Yeah.
And their goals rarely cross with ours. Our Venn diagrams are not overlapped greatly.
Sure.
And for the FA20 and the WRX, with Subaru's goals, they nailed it. They did. The FA20 was the perfect answer to what they needed to fix from the EJ and to hit the standards that they want to hit. And they nailed it. And for that, the FA20 is an awesome engine. It's an awesome engine for that.
So we're talking about pick it up from the dealership, daily drive it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and a tune
about
can be, a tune can definitely unlock some stuff and fix a few things because, well, if you're allowed to, right? That's a big question, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think about many of the constraints. One of them is going to be obviously fuel economy. That's always an issue, right?
And that's something that Subaru, behind the scenes, if you are not aware of as you're watching this, like that's been a big motivating factor is the changing CAFE standards, why Subaru's made a lot of the changes that they've made, like prevalence of CVTs, for instance. They're trying to get to the point where they feel like they can have a fleet average of, I think it's 36 mpg is the next one that's supposed to be.
Not to mention, but for
crazy.
purchasers, fuel economy is always a concern.
Yeah.
This thing is not efficient. The EJ is a very inefficient engine for what it is.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest reasons for that is just straight geometry. And when I say that, I mean bore and stroke, right? There's a ratio between the size of the bore and length of the stroke. And the more over square an engine is, the less the fuel economy tends to be. Now, it isn't always absolute. But for the most part, if you take any engine and you shrink the bore and lengthen the stroke, the economy is going to go up. And that's just kind of a general thing. And that's exactly what happened with the FA20. They lengthened the stroke and they reduced the bore.
So I have a question in this line of the FA20 hit it checking those boxes. So say I wanted to get into Subarus because my buddies have Subarus and they're really cool cars, and I want a 350 wheel horsepower daily because that seems to be where people who are going to drop some money into an engine want to go.
FA24.
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 Yeah. So there you go.
Let's skip the 20 altogether.
Well,
unless it's the BRZ20.
Okay.
The BRZ20 is actually quite different and really nice. I like that BRZ20 a lot.
And the goal would probably be different at that point because it's BRZ versus
sure.
all the other
Yeah. I mean, if you're, well, you said dealerships, obviously.
Yeah, well, I would say like I'm buying a used Subaru and I'm gonna want to turn it up.
Yeah.
Everybody who ends up in a Subaru.
I'd skip the 20 altogether.
Yeah. Well, to your point
personal.
for efficiency, like that's what the FA24 kind of shows how much more efficient it is because you can get to that power level, 350 wheel horsepower or close to it, so much more easily than with this, with any of the EJs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose it's
Maybe they just left
there's definitely like the graphs cross. You know, like you go to a certain horsepower level, and then it becomes the FA has a real hard time, the EJ can excel.
Yeah.
Right. And in the 20s specifically, the 24, we've only recently started, messing with them or pushing them because they just came out.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really pass a judgment on that.
Well, it's no matter what, it is still easier to make big power with an EJ right now than an FA24.
Big power, sure.
Yeah, and the story just because we already have those products.
Or an FA20 for the same.
Yeah, right. I mean,
I remember there was a while there where the 0 to 60 time of the WRX with the FA20 was faster than the STI, and there was a lot of discussion about why would Subaru leave the EJ engine in the STI if it's now slower than the WRX, and the STI is supposed to be the flagship car.
Mm-hmm.
And a big piece of that is because, well, it checks a lot of boxes. It's more efficient. It's more modern. But the ceiling was much lower. Like, it's much easier to get a little bit more power in the FA series. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to go much bigger, the EJ was like the aftermarket had figured out all of the nooks and crannies that you had to go into to sure up if you wanted to make 3, 4, 5, 6, 1,000 horsepower.
Right.
And the FA20, like, it was all new, it was all different, and it had a whole different set of challenges. And to a certain extent, well, actually, probably you would agree that the FA20 is not as ideal if you really wanted to make well over 400 horsepower compared to the EJ. Aftermarket support wise is part of the factors, but then also just kind of construction wise, like there's more limiting factors to the FA20.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about a few of those. So
yeah,
you have an EJ here conveniently. That's pretty cool. So, the stroke on the FA is longer. So the distance business travels this direction is longer, but the deck height didn't change very much. It's like, I think, 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters, like 202 and 201. It's like that. It's not very much.
Yeah.
So in order to accomplish that, the rod had to be shrunk up a little bit.
Yeah.
So the rod got shorter and the stroke got even longer. So the rod ratio, which is length of the rod compared to the length of the stroke, is way worse than an EJ. And that is okay for a low RPM engine. Right. There are benefits to that. And in fact, during part 2, I believe we discussed how I changed the geometry of the airplane engine.
Yep.
Right. Because you want to build your engine, your whole car for that matter, for what you're doing with it.
Right.
And so with the FA, they wanted better fuel economy. Well, that's a low end thing. In almost every engine ever made, if you run down the highway at a lower RPM for the same speed, you'll almost always get better fuel economy. So you build the engine that's more efficient at a lower RPM. You give it the longer gears, which they did, right? And then you immediately increase your higher fuel economy. So they did that. They shrunk the bore down, which I don't know why they did that. Maybe just to make it a square engine, potentially. Square is the bore and the stroke are the same.
Yeah.
So 86 in the case of the FA. But they also... what's they do? They changed the bearing size a smidge to accommodate the crankshaft overlap.
Yeah.
Overlap is the journal of the crankshaft, the journal of the rod. How much those two circles overlap dictates greatly the strength of the crank. Because now we're talking about how much metal is in a continuous line, basically, in the crankshaft, versus if you pull it apart. Now the webbing or the support between the journals is now the crankshaft strength, right? And so you have less continuous metal to it, and therefore becomes weaker. So they had changed the bearing size, I think, bigger at the mains. And then they go smaller with the rods on those two.
They go smaller.
They went smaller with the rods, but bigger mains, smaller than rods, because I think they had to just get to clear all the stuff in here as this longer stroke.
Yes.
And then the rod they had to angle because they had to get rid of this hole.
Yeah.
Right. With the longer stroke, piston went down further, you could no longer have a wristband access hole. So that means you had to assemble it from the bottom, at least the rod caps.
Yep. So
they angled the rod so you can get to the rod bolts from the bottom.
Yes.
So that was like the big change in the geometry on the bottom end of it. They drastically changed the cooling, which we touched on a little bit in one of the previous videos.
So why? I got one for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you need a cylinder 4 cooling mod with an FA?
Because they changed the cooling. Yeah. So the thing with the cylinder 4 cooling mod, like I did before, I think we talked about it in one of the videos as well, right? The cooling on this side of the engine, the water pump feeds directly right here, and the coolant goes into the side of the block here forward of cylinder 2, like right in the front. And it has to get forced between a very tight ridge. In fact, a hole I showed you a little while ago.
Earlier today, Dominic had me stick my fingers in underneath the water pump where the cooling jacket begins, and you can feel there is almost no room for water to want to get past the second cylinder into the fourth one there.
Yeah, it's like this much space. Yeah. You put your finger in there, you feel this little tiny gap in there, and that's it. And somehow all this water has to go through this little tiny gap under all these cylinders to the other side of the cylinder floor to cool this part of the head, and just it doesn't really happen.
Right. Yeah.
So
and by the way, unless you think about it, you may not realize the coolant goes in behind the water pump. This is the start of the cooling circuit, and then it spreads out from there and it goes up. So the ports on the top of the engine are the hot water outlet. The cold water is supposed to go in the bottom.
Yep. Right. Yeah.
It
goes across the bottom into the head, up in here, and then out the top of the crossover pipe. So on this side, it's very restricted on the back. The other issue too, I don't say it's the issue. The other design difference is that in the EJ, the cooling system is cut right down the middle, right here on the bottom, and all of the coolant that passes through here first. Half of the block goes to the head, gets warmed up a little more, then it goes to the top of the block. So you got like a very different temperature bottom top of the cylinders, which I think is interesting. And then you've preheated the water in the head some from the bottom of the engine. On the FA, they didn't do that, right? And one of my videos I talk about reverse cooling and the benefits of that.
In part 2 briefly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. How you can run higher compression ratios because you remove heat from the combustion chamber much quicker if you have cooler water behind it. And only a couple of degrees makes a big difference. A couple of degrees alone makes a big difference. And a lot of guys will tell you that it doesn't, but the Chevy LT1's proof of that.
The reason that a couple of degrees makes difference is because the engine is going to steady state somewhere under load. At a certain point, you're going to cross this gap of thermal capacity of the amount of water that's actually in contact with the cylinder heads in the block at any given time, right? So if you have a couple of degrees cooler temperatures, it means you're moving a lot more water through that block. You're moving a lot more thermal energy out into the water, and a lot of that water is coming out.
You're talking about the delta.
Yes.
Like inlet or outlet versus inlet.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can increase the delta so that you're cooling it off more.
Well, not even that. I'm just saying that there's only so much volume of water you can move through the engine. Right. In an ideal world, you'd move an infinite amount of water through the engine, right?
And you want to make use of the water as it's traveling through as much as possible.
Exactly.
Right. So I have a fixed thermal mass available for removing heat from the engine. And so where do I want to pull the most heat out? Where is it most important? Where will I have the greatest delta T, being the temperature of whatever source I'm moving heat from, and the heat sink, which is the water. And heat transfer literally relies on the delta T, right? You have exposure time or soak time, or whatever term you want to use for that. And you have the flow rate, and you have the delta T. So if I can put cooler water here versus,
where it's hottest.
Where it's the hottest and has the most loading, right? And then I'm going to have more heat transfer out of it.
Yeah.
And that's really critical on all engines, all of them. But the reason they don't all have the head cooled first is because there's a big patent on it, and Evans Cooling owns it, and they want a lot of money to run it.
Right.
So what they've done is what I said before, and 2 is they take the water and they run it into the block like a teeny bit, a little bit first, and then put all of it in the head that they can, and then go back in the block again. So that way they can say on a flow chart, my water goes to the block first, then the head, and then the block. Right. So on the EJ they did it, but with half of the engine. On the FA they did it with a little port this big.
Wow. Yeah.
Under each cylinder, so like a little teeny port under each cylinder, and so a little bit of water gets there.
So better cooling on the FAs.
Yes, better cooling on and the supply and the return are both in the direct middle.
Yeah.
Where on this one's forward to cylinder 2. On both sides of the FA, the coolant comes right in the center, distributes to the little tiny ports on the bottom, goes all through the head, and then in the top, and then through the rest of the engine again.
Okay.
But it's all it's center to center, so it's very balanced on both.
What is your opinion of the valve train? Because I know that it seems like the guys that try and make bigger power with the FAs, like they run into the valve train issues.
Yeah. I want to answer that. But let me say one more thing about the cooling system.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. No, you didn't know. A lot of people say, why didn't the EJ come with more horsepower? Right? Over all these years, why didn't it come with more horsepower? what a lot of them fail to understand or even know is that the EJ was originally designed to be a lot lower horsepower engine.
And it was.
And it was a very low horsepower engine. And the cooling system was designed for a lower horsepower engine.
Yeah.
And when you get into that 300 horsepower range, and so when most manufacturers create engines, what they do is they build it, they have everything set up, and they go to test it to verify it works. They stick it on a dyno, and they run it full power for 24 hours.
Right.
Or more, right? Depends on how they do it. Well, this engine won't do that. I know from experience it won't. I've put multiple engines on the dyno. On my engine dyno, I was doing airplane stuff.
Yeah.
With the cooling system the way it is, and even modified cooling system as much as I could. Yeah. And I've hit the power down. It won't do it. It gets too hot.
Yeah.
Cylinder 4 blows itself up every time.
Okay.
We used to, like I said before, we used to put the airplane engine on the dyno. I'd set it up. I'd hit the throttle. I'd go home. And if I came back in the next morning, heard it running, I was like, heck yes, right? And the plain fact of the matter is none of the engines that when they hit the 240-ish horsepower range could survive.
Okay.
None of them.
For that kind of steady state use.
Yeah. Now, some of it was my dyno, but didn't have quite the cooling system that I think it could have had. But that 240 was really where I was seeing that the coolant temps would really start to run away. And the chance of damage to cylinder 4 was going up a ton. So.
Well, and it's like what makes the Subaru EJ engine so great is also its Achilles heel, which is they didn't change it hardly at all.
Yeah, it's like Legos.
From like late 80s to 2021.
Yeah.
And they had this basic architecture that was there. They changed the bore in the cylinder, but they wanted to stay within that framework, and that's what makes there's so much interchange. There's so much parts interchangeability that you have, so you can try different combinations. That's what makes it kind of interesting to play with EJs.
And what's great now is we have a lot of the tools to make an EJ that can, steady state under load at 350 horsepower for hours.
Some amount of time.
Yeah, well, there's people endurance racing Subarus.
Sure. But because of that, that they took so long to change anything, then there's a lot of those limitations that are just kind of baked in, and that just kind of became more limiting as the power got increased. And that's where like the FA was an interesting thing because it was a complete new blank slate build. So it's like, all right, well, Subaru, let's see what you can do. And so they found some efficiencies, they improved the cooling. But then, like I said, they did not design it to make 400, 500 horsepower. Like they had other things in mind, and so there's other limitations that you run into.
The piston could do it, the rod could do it, the crank could do it, the heads could do it, they could all do it, but the cooling system cannot. Yeah. Plain and simple.
But in the EJ.
In the EJ.
You know what's interesting about now we're talking about manufacturers designing things. The FA24STI basically existed, right? It existed as a design. My understanding from all the rumors I heard back then is that it was under testing, and then they decided not to sell it. Basically, they decided not to build and sell the car that way. But I think you probably heard the same thing. Rumors of around like an almost 400 horsepower car. Which means that if the FA24 was on a design sheet, was on a blueprint, supposed to make 400 horsepower at some point, that means that the FA24 can do that much better than an EJ can, right?
Well, yes, in theory.
If you look at rating of vehicles for towing,
sure.
As soon as the Ascent was rated for towing, what it was, I was like, oh yeah, they could put that in STI, no problem.
Yeah, because
it's got to handle a higher horsepower output, steady state.
Yeah.
Right? You're dragging something on the highway, it takes more horsepower to do that. Take it up a hill, it takes more horsepower. And to be certified for towing, right, you got to be able to handle that heat load. And it clearly is rated for that heat load. Now, whether it's 400 horsepower, I don't know, but easily the 270 something continuously while towing, it's rated for. So that's an interesting thing.
It's not quite as simple as 270 while towing means 500 while not towing, but
right. I mean, I think 270 while towing, you'd probably have a hard time if there wasn't enough air, but still.
Well, the other part of it too is just how easy it is to add power to the FA24s. Like that, that kind of gives you a hint of how. I mean, it's the first time that a Subaru, I would say, has been significantly undertuned, from the factory. I mean,
7 pounds boost.
Yeah. And a completely artificial torque band. They want to make it feel like a naturally aspirated engine. They're pulling boost away anywhere that they can to make it feel like a flat torque curve, and that's totally artificial. So that it basically that's where there's so much potential to tune the car up, and which is, I would argue that's one of the things that Subaru was very late to address, was that there were so many other cars that came on to compete with the S10, the WRX, especially from the European market. They were also well under tuned, and so you had all this power that you could easily pick up.
Yeah.
And so it was hard to look at like a WRX where, if you reflash ECU, maybe you gain 30 horsepower. If you reflash ECU in this car, you gain 60, 70, 80 horsepower. And now finally the FA24WRX is that way, where you've got all that potential where you can tap into it.
Well, if I haven't compared them side by side, but I heard the FA24 Turbo was nearly the same as the 20 WRX Turbo.
I've heard that as well.
Right? I think it's very similar nomenclature. There's
Very
like one slight difference.
It uses an electronic wastegate.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But I think that the wheels are like the same or whatever. I don't know.
They're both geared turbos. I have not had them side by side either, but I think they're very similar other than the wastegate design.
Yeah. Now, when I did the 23 WRX tune, once the stuff was finally all figured out, and we could actually do it without problems, it made like 25 more horsepower than FA20 WRX would, and I didn't have to try. Like, it was simple. Yeah. The FA20s, man, you get those in like, you go to tune one versus the other, and like day to day they're different. And you ask any tuner that's done the FA20s, it can be a frustrating experience, because like you just want to pull your hair out, because yesterday the FA20 I did that was stock did all of this fine, and then today it's like knock, it just throws all this knock at you, and the dam's dropping, and you're like, what is going on? Why is this so different? And it literally is that, at least it feels like that whole, it's a Monday car, or a Wednesday car, or a Friday car, right? When they say they built the cars at certain days of the week, you get better attention to detail, and it feels like that when you're tuning them. But the FA24 so far was really, really receptive to things, and that was really cool. Another thing too about the FA20, 20, when I lower the compression them just half a point, they behave so much better. Just that half a point, they behave not quite like an EJ, but they tune easier like an EJ tunes. When you go down, just half a point of compression made a huge difference in every FA that I've had. So
it's probably not as close to that
knock threshold. Yeah. And they take quite a bit more timing then. Like it's like a 5-degree increase, which is that half a point. Now, timing does not necessarily equal power. I just make sure that's said. But but the trend is when you're doing that, like it definitely. I mean, and you expect some of that, right? A lower compression ratio is going to have a lower burn speed. Lower burn speed means I'm going to need more ignition advance. Yeah, plain and simple. To have cylinder pressure at the same point.
Well, it's like if you've got more room to work with, the safety factor.
Sure, that as well.
And the consistency, because probably if you're right at that ragged edge, you got the Friday car, and something is off, and you've got to back the timing off. Whereas if you give it a little bit more room to breathe, okay, well now you can kind of find that point much more easily, much more consistently.
Well, the FA20 header, for example, I don't know if you ever looked inside the header of one of those, right where the turbo mounts, and they welded the two inlets.
Right.
One of them is significantly smaller than the other one from the factory, and that size changes based on which one you see. But the weld bead is like super thick sometimes, and sometimes it's not as thick, and so you have a dramatically different minimum radius.
Right.
Going into the turbo, so two cylinders get way more back pressure than the other two.
That means if you have a 15 plus WRX
get an aftermarket header
with an FA20, you probably want an aftermarket header.
Just not the Tomei unequal length one, please.
Yes. All right. Well, we are on a clock here.
Yes.
We're going to shut this down because, believe it or not, somebody here has to get on a plane. I'm not going to say who.
Yeah. No,
but you can probably guess.
Fortunately, it's not a plane that he built the engine for.
That's right.
Thank God.
So we're going to stop here just so that you can have a leisurely drive to the airport versus setting a sector time.
He's driving, so I don't know if you've experienced that. It's never leisurely.
Yes.
Oh, I do want to point out, I wore my MPS shirt just for the vintage.
Nice.
Just for the vintage today.
Cool. Yeah. Yes. Well, Dom, thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, I would love to talk and answer your question about the valve train more.
Well, that like I said, this is 3A.
Okay.
And so then at some point in the handful of weeks to come, we'll find 3B, and we'll sit down, we'll talk to the valve train and any other questions. So this is probably a great opportunity for you at home in the comments below.
Oh, write questions, yes.
Write questions that you want Dom and I to talk about, and maybe Jeremy will get you on the podcast as well. But this is to be continued. So questions in the comments, and we will get back to them.
Yeah.
So Dom, thanks so much. Safe travels home, and to be continued.
Please.
All right. So thanks very much, guys, and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.